Polly the polynomial penguin, back talking to you about factoring quadratic trinomials, where a doesn't equal 1. Now here's a question. What do you get when you cross a penguin and a vampire? Frostbite!
First thing we're going to do is review some vocabulary. So a quadratic trinomial is an expression of the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where x is a variable and a, b, and c are non-zero constants. The constant a is called the leading coefficient, b is the linear coefficient, and c is the additive constant. So the only one I want you to make sure you know is the leading coefficient, the number that's in front of your x squared. That's your leading coefficient in a quadratic trinomial. And again, quadratic because it's degree 2, and trinomial because it has 3 terms. Now, what I also want you to be able to do today, just like last time, is be able to pick out your a, b, and c. So again, your a value is the number in front of your x squared. It's your leading coefficient. So in this case, that would be this 2. Your b value is going to be the number in front of the x. So in this case, that would be -6. And then your c value would be that 4 added at the end. Now, when factoring a quadratic expression, the first thing you have to do every single time is look for the greatest common factor that you can take out. That must be done, otherwise our bottoms-up method doesn't work. So first, look for a greatest common factor to take out. Once you've done that, or you've realized that you can't do that, then you move on to step 2, where you use one of these factoring methods. We're going to go over magic x a little bit further today and do some harder problems with that. Problems where your a value isn't always 1. Now again, how does the magic x work? Well, you must find 2 numbers whose product is the number on top of the x and whose sum is the number on bottom of the x. So 2 numbers that multiply together to make 15 and add together to make 8. And again, that was 5 and 3. That's how the magic x works. You need to figure out those 2 numbers, the 2 numbers that multiply together to make the number on top and add together to make the number on the bottom. So let's review the bottoms-up factoring method. So if you're given ax squared plus bx plus c, a quadratic trinomial, the first thing you want to do is look for a GCF. Okay, if there's no GCF or if there is one, take it out, and then you can try to factor using the bottoms-up method. First thing to do with the bottoms-up method is make a magic x. Next, you're going to write the product of a and c on the top of your x. So what is a times c? Whatever that is, that goes up here. Your b value goes on the bottom of the x. And then you're going to solve the magic x. You need to figure out 2 numbers that multiply together to make this one and add together to make this one. Once you figure out those 2 numbers, you're then going to divide those numbers by your a value. And now, this part 6, where it says simplify each fraction, this is going to come into play this time because in our last lesson, your a value was just 1. So you didn't have to simplify, you just went bottoms up. Today, you will actually have to simplify one or both of these and then go bottoms up with your answer. So remember, to write your answer when you're factoring using the bottoms up method, it's going to be 2 sets of parentheses. In the first set of parentheses, we're going to write ax plus your number. And then in the other set of parentheses, we're going to write ax plus your other number. Now, if one of these were negative, then it would be ax minus that number. That's how that works.
How did the penguin start his first date? With an icebreaker! Wah, wah. Double dial.
So example 1 says factor 5x squared plus 7x minus 6. Again, the first thing you always do when you're factoring a quadratic trinomial or anything, see if there's a GCF, a greatest common factor that you can take out. Is there a number that divides into each of these terms? No, just 1, right? Is there a variable that each of these terms have? No, this doesn't have an x. If it did, then you could take out an x, but it doesn't. So we go on to our magic x. We need to figure out what's our a value. That's 5. What's our b value? That's 7. And what's our c value? That's -6. We now make our magic x. A times c is going to go on top of the x. So what's 5 times -6? That's -30. Your b value goes on the bottom. You then think about 2 numbers that multiply together to make -30 and add together to make 7. Their product has to be -30. Their sum has to be 7. Well, since the product has to be negative, that means one number is going to be negative, one number is going to be positive. And since their sum is positive, that means the bigger number is going to be positive. So how about 10 and -3 multiply together to make -30 and add together to make 7? Perfect. We then divide both numbers by our a value, which in this case is 5. And then we're going to simplify each fraction. So we look at 10 over 5. Does that simplify? Yeah, it technically simplifies to 2. But since we're doing bottoms up, we want to keep the fraction. So how would I simplify this? I divide both of these by 5 and I just get 2 over 1. Okay, so leave it as 2 over 1 instead of just writing it as 2. This will help you when we're writing our answer. This over here doesn't simplify at all, so we're just going to leave it. So in our first set of parentheses, we're going to go bottoms up, we go 1x plus 2. And in the second set of parentheses, we're going to go bottoms up 5x minus 3. That's how that works.
Why couldn't the penguin take apart his Legos? He glues them together. You try.
Okay, same thing here. So first, is there a greatest common factor we can take out? There's no number that divides into each of those evenly. What about, is there a variable each term has? No, this would need an x. So we move on to our magic x. We have our a, our b, and our c value. And in the top of the magic x, we are going to put a times c, which is 2 times 10, so that's 20. In the bottom, we put our b value, which is 9. We're then going to figure out two numbers whose product is 20 and whose sum is 9. Two numbers that add together to make 9 and multiply together to make 20. How about 5 and 4? There you go. Now we divide both of those numbers by our a value, which in this case is 2. And we simplify our fractions. Can we simplify 5 over 2? No, that's as simplified as that fraction gets. Over here, 4 over 2. Yeah, technically it simplifies to 2, but I want to leave it as a fraction, so it helps me go bottoms up. So it's going to be 2 over 1. Now, two sets of parentheses. In the first set, we're going to go bottoms up. We go 2x plus 5. In the second set of parentheses, we go with our simplified fraction 1x plus 2, or just x plus 2. And that's how you do that. Now, example 2, we got 15x squared plus 4x minus 3. First, is there a greatest common factor we can take out? No, there's no number that divides into each of those, and each term does not have the same variable that we can take out. So we move on to our magic x. Our a value is 15, our b value is 4, and our c value is negative 3. We start by making our magic x. A times c, gonna go on top. So 15 times negative 3 goes on top. Your b value goes on the bottom. And then you need to figure out two numbers that multiply together to make negative 45 and add together to make 4. What two numbers would that be? Well, since your product is negative, that means one number is negative, one number is positive. And since your sum has to be positive, that means the bigger number should be positive. So that would be 9 and negative 5. You then divide both numbers by your a value, which in this case is 15, and now we simplify those fractions. So over here, 9 over 15, that's going to simplify if we divide each of those by 3. You get 3 over 5. And then over here, negative 5 over 15 is going to simplify to negative 1 over 3 if we divide each of those by 5. Now, again, two sets of parentheses. In the first one, we go bottoms up. So it's going to be 5x plus 3. And the second set of parentheses is going to be 3x minus 1. Boom.
What do you call a penguin in the desert? Lost! You try.
Okay, doing the same thing. So first, greatest common factor? Nope. So we move on. A value is 4, B value is 8, C value is negative 5. We then make our magic x. A times c is going to go on top. So 4 times negative 5 is going to be negative 20. Your b value goes on the bottom. That would be 8. We then got to think about two numbers whose product is negative 20 and whose sum is 8. Two numbers that multiply together to make negative 20, add together to make 8. Since the product is negative, that means one number has to be negative, one has to be positive. And since the sum is positive, the bigger number should be positive. So two numbers that multiply together make 20. How about 10 and 2? And since the bigger number has to be positive, we go 10 and negative 2. We then divide both of those numbers by our a value, and we simplify those fractions. So how do we simplify 10 over 4? Well, if we divide each of those by 2, you get 5 over 2. And then over here, if we divide each of these by 2, you end up getting negative 1 over 2. Now we're going to create two sets of parentheses. In the first, we go bottoms up. We go 2x plus 5. And then the second set of parentheses, we go bottoms up. We go 2x minus 1. And that's how you do that. Example 3, we now are doing the same thing. So first, is there a greatest common factor we can take out? Ooh, yeah, actually, each of these numbers is divisible by 3. So I could actually take out a 3 from each of these numbers. Is there a variable? No, these two have an x, this one doesn't. So I can take out a 3 from each of these terms. So we're going to write a 3 on the outside of the set of parentheses. On the inside, we write each of these terms divided by 3. So this divided by 3 would be 7x squared. This divided by 3 would be negative 3x. And this divided by 3 would be negative 10. Cool. We have now factored out our greatest common factor. We now factor this by doing our magic x. Here our a value is 7, our b value is negative 3, and our c value is going to be negative 10. So let's create our magic x. Let's put a times c on top. So that'd be 7 times negative 10. That's negative 70. Your b value goes on the bottom. That's negative 3. Now all you got to do is solve your magic x. So figure out two numbers whose product is negative 70 and whose sum is negative 3. So since your product is negative, one number has to be negative, one number has to be positive. And since your sum is negative, that means the bigger number is going to be negative. So two numbers that multiply together make 70. How about 7 and 10? And then your bigger number has to be negative. So it'd be negative 10 and positive 7. Now, we divide each of those by our a value, which in this case is going to be 7. We simplify those fractions. Can we simplify negative 10 over 7? No. Can we simplify 7 over 7? Yes, that actually simplifies to 1. But I don't want to write it as just 1. I want to leave it as a fraction so I can go bottoms up. So instead of writing 1, I'm going to write 1 over 1. Means the same thing, but now I can go bottoms up. So in my first set of parentheses, it's going to be 7x minus 10. In my second set of parentheses, going bottoms up, it's going to be 1x plus 1. And don't forget, at the beginning of the problem, we factored out that 3. So that has to be in your answer in the front. So it's going to be 3, and then parentheses, 7x minus 10. And then in the other set of parentheses, 1x plus 1.
What do penguins wear on their heads? Ice caps! Wah, wah, wah. You try.
Okay, we are factoring this right here. We do the same thing. Our first step should always be to check, is there a greatest common factor we can take out? Well, yeah, it looks like each of these terms is divisible by 2, so we can take out a 2. Is there an x we can take out? No, this term doesn't have an x, so we can't take that out. So we write 2 on the outside of a set of parentheses. On the inside of those parentheses, we put each of these terms divided by 2. So it's going to be 2, and then parentheses, this is going to be, when we divide that by 2, 20x squared. When we divide this by 2, you get negative 27x. Divide this by 2, you get negative 8. Now you should be able to check if this is accurate. You could distribute this, and you should get exactly what you got up here. Sweet, so we have factored out our greatest common factor. We now can use our magic x to factor what's left in here. So our a value is going to be 20, our b value is going to be negative 27, our c value is going to be negative 8. We create our magic x, a times c is going to go on top, so 20 times negative 8 goes on top. Our b value goes on the bottom, that would be negative 27. And now we think about two numbers whose product is negative 160 and whose sum is negative 27. This may take some time because it's not apparent right away what your two numbers are going to be. So you're going to have to check a lot of numbers. Again, since your product is negative, that means one number is negative, one number is positive. Since your sum is negative, that means your bigger number should be negative. Again, you guess and check a bunch and you end up getting negative 32 and positive 5. After you do that, you then divide each of your numbers by your a value, which in this case is 20. And then you simplify each of these fractions. So how do you simplify this over here? Just divide each of those by 4. You end up getting negative 8 over 5. And then here, divide each of these by 5, and you end up getting 1 over 4. You then create two sets of parentheses. In the first, you're going to go bottoms up. You go 5x minus 8. In the second, you go bottoms up, you go 4x plus 1. And don't forget, at the beginning of the problem, we factored out a 2. So that has to go in front of your set of parentheses. This is your final answer. Okay, so here we're doing the same thing. We're looking for a greatest common factor first that we can take out from each term. Yes, it looks like each term is divisible by 4, and each term has an x. So we could also take out an x as well. So we're going to write a 4 and an x on the outside of a set of parentheses. On the inside, we're going to put whatever's left when you divide each term by 4x. So it looks something like this. When you divide 20x cubed by 4x, you end up with 5x to the second. And then same thing here. When you divide this by 4x, you're left with 11x. And then here, when you divide 8x by 4x, you're just left with a 2. You could always check to make sure you did it right by distributing the 4x to each term, and you should get exactly what you started with. So now that we factored out our greatest common factor, what we can do is factor what's inside the parentheses. So this is still a quadratic trinomial that we can use the magic x on. So our a value is 5, our b value is 11, and our c value is 2. So now it's time to make our magic x. So we go ahead and make that. Put our a times c on top of the x, our b value on the bottom. And now we think about two numbers whose product is 10 and whose sum is 11. Two numbers that multiply together to make 10 and add together to make 11. Well, how about 5 and 2? No, right? Those don't add together to make 11. So it would have to be then 10 and 1. And now we divide each of those by our a value, which in this case is 5. And we simplify if necessary. Can we simplify this over here? Yeah, we divide each of those by 5. And again, we could write 2, but we want to leave our answer as a fraction so we can go bottoms up. So it's going to be 2 over 1. In our parentheses, we create two sets of parentheses. In our first one, we go bottoms up, we go 1x plus 2. In our second set of parentheses, we go bottoms up, we go 5x plus 1. And don't forget, at the beginning of the problem, we took out a 4x. So that needs to be on the outside of those parentheses as well. Now, a word problem says a triangle has an area of 4.5x squared minus 4.5x minus 5 inches squared. The base of the triangle is 3x minus 5 inches. What is the height of the triangle? Okay, so step 1 in the word problem. We're not scared. We can do this. Step 2, we got to define our variables. So what is the question asking? It's asking us, what is the height of the triangle? So what we're going to do is say h is equal to the height of the triangle. That's what we're trying to find. Sweet. Does it give us anything else that we should create a variable for? Well, it says the base of the triangle is 3x minus 5. So we'll say b is equal to the base of the triangle. And then over here on our triangle that we're drawing, because it always helps to have a figure, we're going to put 3x minus 5 inches. Does it give us anything else? Yeah, it says the triangle has an area of 4.5x squared minus 4.5x minus 5 inches squared. So we'll say a is equal to the area of the triangle, and then we'll throw that in the triangle so that we know that's the area. Cool. We have defined all of our variables, so we now can create our equation. So what is our equation? Well, it's area of a triangle. So what's the area of a triangle formula? That's actually 1/2 the base times the height. So a is equal to 1/2 the base times the height. Perfect. We are trying to find the height, and we know the base. We also know the area. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually plug in this right here for our area. I am not going to plug in the base yet. Now I'll show you why. If I were to solve this, I want to multiply both sides by 2. I want to get rid of this 1/2. So I multiply both sides of the equation by 2. And when I do that, 2 times 1/2, those just cancel each other out, and I'm left with base times height is equal to this right here, this quadratic trinomial. I could plug in 3x minus 5 here for our base, but then I would divide both sides by 3x minus 5, and we haven't really done that yet. So what I want to do instead is I'm going to factor this. And what I should get is 2 sets of parentheses. One of the parentheses will be my base, and the other will be the height, and then I can be done with the problem. So let's do that. Let's factor this 9x squared minus 9x minus 10. How do I do that? Well, it's a quadratic trinomial. So first, is there a greatest common factor I can take out? No. Next, is there an x I can take out? No. Is there anything else I can do before the magic x? It looks like I'm ready for the magic x. So let's go ahead and make one. We put our a times c on top. So 9 times negative 10 goes on top. Our b value goes on the bottom. And we need to figure out two numbers whose product is negative 90 and whose sum is negative 9. So two numbers that multiply together make negative 90, add together make negative 9 would be negative 15 and positive 6. Again, I know the answers, that's why they popped up right away, but you might take some time. That's okay. You don't need to be able to get it right away. Next, we're going to divide both of these by our a value, which we said is 9, and then simplify each fraction. So over here, I can divide each of these by 3, and over here, I can divide each of these by 3 as well. We're going to write our answer going bottoms up, so we go 3x minus 5 in the first set of parentheses, and the other set of parentheses, we go 3x plus 2. Now, it worked out exactly like we said. This is equal to base times height, right? Which means that the base, 3x minus 5, is one of the parentheses. So the other set of parentheses would then be the height. So we know our height must be 3x plus 2 inches. And you're done.